This is a narrated PowerPoint presentation conducted by Tessa Flintoft. In this presentation, we will be looking at an article and discussing how it relates to accounting theory. So let's get started. The article I have chosen to look at is an article that investigates media pressure and corporate disclosure of performance information. It was written by M.A. Islam and C. Deegan in 2010 and is a fairly recent peer-reviewed article on the given topic. The article looks specifically at two large and well-recognized multinational companies, Nike and H&M. These companies source many of their products from developing countries and have done so for many years. There are very low costs involved with sourcing and purchasing products from developing nations. The reasons for these low costs include poor places of work. They are often cramped, unsafe, and cause many workplace accidents. There is also forced labour, including child labour, physical and verbal abuse suffered by employees, and poor pay packages. Up until the mid-1990s, many of these practices, such as child labour, were relatively unpublicised. However, since then, many of these large multinational companies, such as Nike and H&M, have been heavily criticised as a result of the media attention these issues have gained over subsequent years. It has raised an important and highly debatable question over whether these multinational companies have a corporate social responsibility that extends further than their own employees to those employees in their supply chain. The media has had a significant role to play in the influence of the global community. Pre-1990s, there were no social compliances required of these companies in the supply chain. The media became a way of informing the public of how serious these matters were. And with the growing media outlets such as TV and internet, the information quickly became a focus of the general public on a global scale. The concerns of the global community then applies pressure to these large multinational companies, who in turn put pressure on their supply chain to address the concerns of the public. As a result of these pressures, it has been found that within the annual report of these large global companies, corporate social disclosures, and the extent to which they are made, is directly relatable to the media attention received on these issues, particularly those attracting negative media attention. Also, even though it may only be a few companies within the industry using developing nations to purchase products, if one company in the industry breaches the social contract, then there is usually a flow-on effect. Other companies within the industry will also make social disclosures about how they are addressing these issues, both in their company's actions and within their supply chain. It is questionable as to whether Nike and H&M would have changed its own social reporting policies, given time, without media intervention, or gone on to monitor the conditions of the workers in their own accord. But given the lack of media attention pre-1990 and the lack of social requirements placed on the supply factories, even though they had been operating there for many years and were established long before that, it is unlikely. There are a few limitations to this article, which the authors mention at the conclusion of the report. I feel they need to be mentioned, as they will have an impact on the links I will make to the accounting theory. The first is only the disclosures which resulted from negative media attention were looked at. This means it didn't look at the negative disclosures. For example, the company admitting it made mistakes or was in the wrong, which may influence the global community. Also, the media's agenda wasn't looked into, rather just the effects of it. This is significant because issues of child labour and poor workplace conditions were apparent long before the 1990s. So why were they not reported before then? And why were they investigated at that particular time? Could they have been tipped off by a competitor seeking to gain an advantage? Now let's have a look at the accounting theories. The system-orientated theory. This theory suggests the company is part of the wider social system. Within this theory is a legitimacy theory. This theory can be described as the theory which assumes all organisations try to ensure they operate within a set of social norms gathered from society in which they operate in. Legitimacy is an extremely important resource to the company and is one of the few resources the company can manipulate through disclosure statements and strategies. The social contract is an important concept when describing the legitimacy theory. The social contract refers to the explicit and implicit expectations of society about how the organisation conducts its business. This contract exists between the organisation and society as a whole, and in basic infers organisations should consider the interests of the public, not just its shareholders. Organisations who breach the contract will suffer consequences. These consequences include costs such as falling demand, struggles to work with investors and suppliers, and the government may also step in and enforce taxes and fines to ensure companies are acting within the community expectations. As a result, companies will often prove that they are being and acting in legitimate ways by including disclosures in their annual reports in an attempt to avoid these costs. The legitimacy gap is another area of the legitimacy theory. It refers to the difference between how the company should act in the eyes of the public and how it does act in the eyes of the public. How does the legitimacy theory relate back to the article? Well, companies like H&M and Nike use legitimacy theory to prove they are acting within the social norms. As Nike and H&M and companies like it use developing nations, they could be seen as supporting issues such as child labour. This breaches the social contract as it is deemed unacceptable by the global community. It also causes a legitimacy gap because the company should be acting to avoid any association with the issues such as child labour, but by sourcing products from developing nations, they are acting in ways that support them. To prove their legitimacy, they release social disclosures. These show now they are not acting in support of the issues, and also how they prevent using factories that utilise the likes of child labour and poor working conditions. In conclusion, the article we discussed looked at how multinational companies respond to negative media coverage and the use of positive disclosures. We looked at the system-orientated theory and the legitimacy theory, and how these companies are part of the wider social network, and how they should ensure they work inside the social norms set by society they operate in. Lastly, we looked at how multinational companies use these theories within their organisations. Thank you for listening.